Hey everybody, it's time for my annual fall ritual of winterizing boats. So here I have my 1998 Chaparral with a Mercruiser 305 5-liter, and I'm going to be walking through what it takes to put this away for the winter. And this would apply to carbureted 5 liters and 5.7s back from that era. Fuel injected engines have some different things sometimes that you need to go through, but for these carbureted ones I'll show you what I have to do. Okay, I'm set up to get started. The first thing you need is a water supply. You can use your garden hose and one of the adapters that feeds water into the outdrive. The process we're going to go through is we're going to warm this up, fire it up, warm up the engine. That will warm up the, spin the gears in the lower unit and in the stern drive so that it warms up the oil so it drains better. And it warms up the engine oil, and we're going to do an oil and filter, and we're going to change the stern drive lube. You also, before you start this, you want to have your fuel conditioned. Make sure you have stabilizer in the gas. If you have your fuel properly prepared with stabilizer, when you fire the engine up and you run through this process, you'll pull that stabilized gas into the system. I run stabilized fuel year-round, and I'm running wreck gas without alcohol, and so I really don't have a concern there. But I always make sure that I have the stabilized gas ready, and like I say, you run it through the carburetor and through the whole system in this process. Now I'm going to go fire up the water. Now a couple more things. First, make sure that you have water all the way up to the engine before you try to start it. It's very important with these water pumps and these stern drives and outboards. It's a rubber impeller, and it's only lubricated by water. And even a few seconds of operation without water will damage the impeller. And even though I know better, I accidentally left the water off once and fired the engine up and let it run for a minute during winterizing. And when I realized it, I shut it down. But I automatically went in and replaced the impeller, and I can tell you it was hard as a rock, and it was completely destroyed. Had I tried to run it, the vanes would have broken off. So let me get this fired up here. One other reminder when you're warming up the engine before I forget: when you're running on a garden hose like this, Mercury cautions you not to run the engine at fast idle more than about, I forget the manual exactly, but it's like 13 or 1400 RPM. And I never paid a lot of attention to that, and a few years ago I was letting it warm up. I got busy and doing something else, and the engine speed came up. It was probably running 1500 or better. And all of a sudden I saw some white smoke come out of the exhaust, out of the prop. And I shut it down and tried to figure out what was going on. And essentially there was not enough water flow through the garden hose to keep up and keep the exhaust cool. And the shutters that prevent backflow in the exhaust manifolds, the shutters are made of rubber, or in part, and they melted and spit out one of the shutters out the prop. I ended up having to pull the exhaust system apart and replace them all. So you want to make sure you, basically I don't idle above about 1000 RPM any longer when I'm warming up, just to be extra careful. Alright, to do the oil change, first thing is you want to make sure you don't get any oil on the drive belts, or it will destroy them. And we do this with a suction pump from the top. Screws onto the top of the dipstick tube. Alright, like that. And then we just suction her out. When I first got this, I was worried about whether or not I was getting enough oil out and whether I should pull a drain plug. In the first few years, I set up a rig where I could take out the drain plug, cut away a bottle, like an antifreeze bottle, and put a hose out the drain plug in the transom and collected the oil outside. So I did a drain from the bottom. But I'll tell you, that was a tremendously difficult amount of work. I really wasn't convinced it was worth it for that last little bit of oil that you can't get out of the tube. One thing I got to be careful about here is that I don't tip this over. For the last 20 years or so of this boat's life, I've been doing it this way, and I've not seen any ill effects out of the engine over hundreds of hours. We change the oil every year, suck out what we can get, fresh filter. All seems to work fine. I always try to be thorough though, but that's pretty much all I'm going to get. That way, there's almost no mess whatsoever. It all goes into the bucket here. I will also note that I have one of those things they call a bilge pig that absorbs oil, but it's not supposed to hold water. And so anything that ends up in the bilge gets absorbed by that. So that we don't pollute. Now this is one of the toughest things to do this whole job, and the one I like the least. Well, there wasn't enough room in there for both me and the oil filter wrench and the camera. So here's my half a bucket. What I don't like is taking off the oil filter and dumping a ton of oil in the bilge, even if I have a bilge pig. So I use that tub underneath there to catch the drippings as much as I can. Pull the bucket out. And we'll get the filter off the rest of the way. One of the things that I do is I make a scratch mark on the bottom of these filters. Something that I can feel, because it gets very, very hard to tell when you've made a 3/4 of a turn or a turn movement. Now, I know I've compromised its corrosion resistance, but in the environments I run in, I don't have problems with these oil filters corroding out, and I don't think I've ever had one rust. But that gives me something I can run my finger over when I'm trying to figure out how far I turned it. And I'm going to go ahead and put some oil in the filter to kind of pre-lube it. And you can use a Mercruiser filter, or these are basically GM, small block Chevy. I use their standard filter. This is the tall one. I also run AC PF 1218s, or this Wix 51060. And this one, I got the gasket lubed, and it says to put it on. I've wiped it down underneath, 3/4 of a turn after the gasket touches. The trick is always getting these things snuck in here without spilling any. That gets the oil filter. Like I say, that's the toughest part of this job, because you got to stand on your head to get all the way down there and get that out. And so this is their 25W40 4-stroke marine oil. This engine being non-catalyst is the conventional rather than synthetic. I could run synthetic in it, but it really hasn't had a need. It works fine with this 25W40. It's been doing it for 23 years and still seems to be running just fine. So. So as part of this process, they want you to empty out the bottle of stern drive oil. And at first I didn't think that was important, but it's kind of amazing how much fine particles show up in the oil. And it's a good idea if you can dump them out. If you've got a system that's got this monitor bottle on it, you know, every time it heats up, it feeds oil up into there, and when it cools off it goes back down in, and some of the debris gets trapped. Alright, to do this one, you want to drain it. The stern drive needs to be all the way up. You want the biggest screwdriver you can find so you get something that fits the slot. And you pop those guys loose. And they'll start to drain. Then you take out the vent and let her drain down. While that one's draining, I'm going to take a look here at my small motor. Because if you got an outboard, this little 8-horse, kind of got the same thing, except we don't need to change it every year, but I always need to take a look and see if I get any water out of it. She looks good. Yeah, that really does look good. We do that, pull the vent out, and we'll just make sure it's full. Oh, see, there she goes, full. Didn't take much at all. You want to make sure they're good and snug. You don't want to overdo it, kill them. There's a torque spec for them, but I've never used the torque spec. I just try to make sure they're tight. Okay. And then just a couple comments. I use Mercury's high performance gear lube. It's what they spec for the outdrives on the Mercruisers, but you can use it on anything, and so I also use it in this end, in the small motor. Keeps you from having to keep too many different kinds of lube around. Also, while I'm waiting for this other one to drain a little bit more, this stuff is really thick, and when it gets cold, it gets pretty hard to pump and slow. So I always take these bottles, and I put them in the house, and I put them in a tub of hot water, hot tap water, and just warm them up. I mean, they're not really, you know, they're what, probably 100 degrees or so. But compared to if they've been sitting out and they're 40 or 50 degrees, it makes it a lot easier to fill the drives with it. Alright, it was drained down, so I went ahead and put the filling tool, threaded that in. Now we need to put the drive down. So you empty it with the drive up, and you fill it with the drive down. So now we'll pump it full until we get oil out the valve. And if you warm the bottles up like I did, it takes about half the time. And they do tell you to shake the bottles before you use them to mix up the additives. This should take around a quart. Alright, you can start to see it coming out. There we go. Once you get that, you tuck the vent back in there for now. Then we're going to take this bottom one out. Put the drain plug back in and try not to dump out any more than necessary. Now to tighten these, I'll have to trim the drive back up. Then we come in here, fill the bottle back up. Always got to have 2 quarts on hand to do this job. There we go. So we fill her up, cap back on, and then we go back and finish in back. At this stage, I'm done putting the oil in, so I'm going to take the towels off so that when we start it, it doesn't get caught in the belt. Alright, then we go back here to the vent, pull that one out one more time, drop it on the ground. It's supposed to, but you want to make sure you get a good flow out of it. The flow's coming down from that bottle. Looks like I do. It's continuing to flow, so it's so that it's flowing more than just the overflow from filling at the bottom. We'll just come back down here. Cinch this one down. Okay. Good and tight. There's a torque spec, and it's like 30 to 50 inch-pounds, but I don't have an inch-pound screwdriver. Maybe one of these days I should get myself one, but don't have it at the moment. Okay, so we turn the water back on, wait till we get pressure up, and as we have, and the small engine, that's an 8-horse by the way, it's a nice kicker for fishing, for trolling, kicker on a bracket, and I'll go back to this engine and fog it, pull the spark plugs out and spray it with fogging oil. But it doesn't need a lot more winterizing than that. Dump the fuel filter out. So now we take the flame arrestor off. And incidentally, on flame arresters, these are important because in case of a backfire, they prevent you from igniting gases in the engine compartment. And right now this one's in pretty good shape. I got a little bit of stuff I could take off, but you want to keep these clean, and periodically, every couple seasons or so, based on the number of hours I run, I will clean that with solvent, spray it out with like a carburetor or fuel injection cleaner solvent, and let it dry very well before I put it back on. But if they get dirty, they're not affected. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fire it up. In fact, what I will actually do is I'm going to leave the flame arrestor on there for a minute. I have water turned on. The oil's in the engine. It's been topped up. Oil filters in place. Everything's in place. So I'm going to fire it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to fog it to fog the cylinders and the intake system. And then shut it down. And then once that's finished, then we'll go over put antifreeze in. The electric chokes on these engines are a little aggressive. On a car, there's a vacuum pull-off so that when you get vacuum, it'll pop this open a little. But on the marine engines, it's purely an electric choke. There's no pull-off, and so you've got to wait for it to warm up and open. Alright, then what you want to do on these is you want to spray about a half a can of this fogging oil. And you kind of want to get it across. It's a 2-barrel carburetor, so you go back and forth across and hit both cylinders and try to get her to stall it. There. Yeah, about a half a can. And sometimes you have to, sometimes I have to lean on the throttle a little bit to make sure it's closed all the way. Because sometimes it'll be open just a crack. And so it just takes the slack out of the cable. Get about a half a can of it in there. And that should be enough to make things work till next year. Put that guy back. This one's really pretty clean. I did it end of last season, and with the number of hours I ran, it's really not bad. Now we'll go shut the water off. Okay, now it's time to drain the water, and this engine has 5 plugs. There are 2 on the exhaust manifold, 1 on each exhaust manifold, 1 on each lower side of the block. You can see right there, you can see the side of the block and you can see the exhaust manifold. So we'll pop that guy out of there. And you want to be careful not to burn yourself. Because the water's a little warm. And when you put these back, you want to be really careful because they're plastic and they're very easy to over-torque and break. I've done it before, and if you break it off, you get a leak, actually. And I had one do that. So you want them to be firm enough that they won't come out. Yet you don't want to torque them too hard because they're only plastic, and it's real easy to bust them off. Well, while that's draining, I'm going to go around the other side. Let's get the opposite side. So there's one manifold on this side. And then I don't know if we can see that one or not, but I can't get it to focus in very well. Alright. And you do want to make sure they flow at least a little bit so that you'll get some scale, not out of the manifold hoses as much as out of the engine block. Okay. Snug, snug. Now, number 5 is on this hose down here at the bottom, and I'll pull that one. That's the hose into the water pump. Now, when this boat was new, well, not much comes out of that one, but some does. While that's draining. When the boat was new, it didn't have that, and this is the standard water pump hose. It at the bottom goes to the water pump, and at the top it comes up here to the thermostat housing. So it drops in there sort of like that. And Mercury in later years offered a hose assembly that has a valve right here, because otherwise you need to take this hose off to drain that elbow. And so after I had this boat 3 or 4 years, I found out that that was available as a service part, and I went out and bought that and retrofitted it. So this is the original hose, but now the new one has one of these blue plugs in it, and that lets you drain the whole block. Now, you want to have antifreeze in these blocks. There are several ways to do it. You can buy one of the kits that hooks up to the earmuffs and actually pump it through the block. I have one of those kits, and I used it on here once, but it just didn't seem to me that it was particularly efficient. So, well, first of all, let me get this other plug back in the block. Good. Okay, so all the plugs are back in now. So you can use it. You can use it with one of those kits, or Mercury will tell you to remove this housing, which is the thermostat housing, and the thermostat's in underneath here. So you would take these 2 bolts off and lift this whole thing off and scrape the gasket and put a new gasket on and fill through the thermostat hole. What I've learned instead is that on these engines, see if I can get enough light in here, On these small block Chevys, the intake manifold that they use has a couple of plugs in it, and there's a crossover passage here that goes basically across between from the thermostat over to the cylinder heads. And if you take this plug out, it goes straight into the cooling circuit. And so I'll show you in a minute here. One last thing before I put antifreeze in the block. Mercury recommends we don't want to start it, but we want to bump the starter just a few times around, just to break any airlock in the water pump and make sure that the water pump drains completely. So having done that, we get in here and you see that 7/8 socket. Take this plug out, and then you got a passage right in. Then I have a piece of pipe, which is a 8-inch pipe nipple, half-inch pipe. Goes right in that dude. Now I don't know that this will work on every model year. Not everybody, it may not be possible for everybody, but it works for me. I had a 4-cylinder inline, and that one, yeah, my method every year was getting a gasket, scraping it, and redoing it. But ever since I found this method, it works pretty darn good. So we'll fill this with antifreeze, and this is the propylene glycol marine engine antifreeze. It's not just RV, there are a couple of versions, and this version, this is it's about a 50-50 mix of the -200, which is a very heavy duty, so I end up with about a -100 or -75, and it's got the corrosion inhibitors block. And this guy takes around 3 gallons to fill. But this is very close to the high point of the engine. I mean, it's you have a standpipe and it's filling above the level of the thermostat. I'm pretty careful to collect this. In the spring, I'll open up those block drains and I'll collect this with a pan, and basically I'll run this for usually about 3 years, and then I'll replace it with fresh. I mean, it's just sitting. The engine's not running, so that's been pretty successful for me in the past. And I've checked this mix out with my refractometer, and I know it's good for what I want it to do. When I was buying, trying to find -100, I was having trouble, and then I found online I could buy the -200s. It's a Starbright, I believe, and then dilute it to whatever concentration, whatever freeze point you want. I can hear it coming up now. And like anything else, you don't want to get this on the drive belt. I'll torque that plug up. Got it good and tight, snug back down. Now when I get it parked for the winter, I'll pull the battery out and charge it, and we'll be good to go for the winter. All set. Looking forward to spring. Always hate putting boats away. It's always more fun getting them out. But that's what it takes to put one of these old Mercruisers together and keep it going. When I've got 22 or 23 years on this one, and she's still going strong. Good strong motor, take care of it, and they'll serve you well. All for now.